Hello, welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today, I'm with Tobias Hunger, who is, as you call it, an employee of 60FPS, which you guys probably heard of, has recently been renamed to Slint. I almost said Slate for a second. Slint. Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk more about kind of what you're doing over there. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. My name is Tobias. I'm a developer at 60FPS, a company that tries to build a UI toolkit for Rust and other languages as well, written in Rust with native UI code. And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I heard you're somewhat of a fan. You're very nervous, right? Don't be nervous, okay? We're all normal people, right?
Yeah, just lots of them.
So at 60FPS, it's just a couple of people, right? I think it's you and plus two others. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have our two founders, and I joined in January as the first employee. So I'm rather happy about that.
So has that been a lot of growing pain for them? Oh, we have to get, contract ready. You got to get, all these things, etc. Right? There's probably a lot of setup that they have to get ready for it. You're like the guinea pig for all this now.
Yes, of course. But that's what you get when you go into a little company.
Yeah. So what were you doing actually before you were working at 60FPS? Because this could be quite interesting. Like, I wonder why you were selected to come on board.
Before joining, I was in the German automotive industry. Before that, I was working on a C+ UI toolkit, especially on the tooling for that. That's also where I got to know the other two guys, Simon and Olivier. So I was already talking to them before they founded the company that somebody should do something like Slint, before I even knew that they would do that with their company. So I guess that's why they thought about me when they started to hire people.
So you're kind of like the idea guy, but they took your idea and then thought
your
job later?
They were already running with it, I guess. At least they had the ideas ready. I mean, I don't think there was any code yet, but it's definitely not my idea. It's just that I had this very similar idea and was trying to sell that.
So what was actually the idea of Slint then? Because I'm guessing there must be some difference, right?
So basically what we try to do is have a special language to describe the UI itself. So basically, I have a button here and I have another button next to it. We have other UI elements here and there. You can also have some simple logic in that language, like this button is twice as wide as the other button and stuff like that. But the language itself is not Turing complete, also strongly typed, so you get the type safety you're used to as a Rust developer. So we made sure that it's not Turing complete so that we can offer tooling at some point. We don't have that yet, but I'm a tooling guy and I'm probably going to look into that in the next couple of months to get that rolling.
What kind of tooling are you looking to support then?
Well, basically some graphical tools to drag and drop UI elements on a canvas and design your UI that way instead of just coding it. So basically opening up to a wider range of users by reducing the technical knowledge to design a UI.
Like a WYSIWYG, basically. WYSIWYG editor, they call it.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we already have a live preview, so while you code, you can just see what you're doing live, updating next to your Visual Studio Code or whatever. We also have a language server plug for our language, so you do get decent error messages. So we do have quite a good tooling already, but there's, of course, always room for improvement.
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about that because I thought that was super interesting. And I think it's hard to do a solid UI library without that live preview or that hot code reload where you can make a couple of changes, save it, and then take a look what it is. Because I remember making iOS apps a long time ago, and it's always like once you're just about to get done compiling your app, you discover you missed something, and you have to stop it and redo it, make your small change, semicolon or whatever. And yeah, then you have to recompile and start again, right? So like what is actually running on that? Is that a VM that's running it, or what is that actually that does it?
So technically we have different options. So typical use case for a Rust programmer would be to have the file and include that as either as a file or into your project with some macro, or to just write it inline with some other macro, which will then trigger our compiler, which will optimize your data structures, remove redundant information, stuff like that, and then generate native Rust code, and the whole thing is then compiled. We also support the same thing for C++. So you can also use the Slint UI language for native C++ projects if you want to do that. So all the backend code is still written in Rust, of course. And we have basically an interpreter, which we use for JavaScript, for example. So that takes that file, uses basically the same infrastructure as a compiler to turn that into data structures, which you can then see live on screen.
So what are the limitations of that? Is it that you can only get UI, or I think I've seen you guys actually adding in logic and stuff with Rust in order to make that happen, or no?
Well, the idea is that the Slint language is used to describe the UI itself, and also interaction points like data structures, callbacks, stuff like that. And then you implement the business logic in a real programming language, which basically uses these interaction points to communicate data back and forth.
So, okay, so I understand. It's like you use this special language, and then that will get translated into native code,
Yes.
right? Which then you can somehow connect back to with a macro, I think. It's just hard for me to understand how that actually works underneath the hood. Like, I'm familiar with Flutter, where you actually have a separate like engine that handles all this kind of stuff on the runtime side, I think. But of course, when you compile it for real, you can actually do everything, compile the head, so you get AOT. But when you're development, you're actually having a VM on there that's kind of doing a lot of, what do you call that?
Well, it's not really a VM, but we have a small runtime, which does
Okay.
basic infrastructure things. And then the generated code is basically just hooking into that and working with that. And your code then hooks into that generated code for data exchange and callbacks and whatever you need to make UI run. But the idea is to have a very clear separation between the UI code and the interaction that happens there and the business logic, which is in Rust or C++ or whatever.
This runtime, is it only in debug mode, or is it actually like always going to be there, the same type of runtime?
It's not really a runtime. It's just a set of, it's in Rust terms, it's a crate with a couple of functions in there. The generated code interacts with.
Okay. So the language that you guys are using, do you have a name for that?
Well, we call it the Slint UI language, basically. It looks a bit like JSON and TypeScript and CSS code. So if you're familiar with those technologies, you should find it pretty easy to get started with.
Yeah, it didn't seem too difficult, but yeah, I think my big question was like, why do we need to have this? Why can't we just do everything within Rust? Like, there's quite a lot of languages that do that. I think SwiftUI is one for sure. Dart with Flutter is one. Why is it that we need to have this language? I think it's just out of convenience, right?
Yeah, it's basically convenience. I mean, in the end, you could write the generated code yourself if you wanted to, but it's just a lot of boilerplate stuff and wiring up infrastructure things and stuff like that. So why not just generate that?
Yeah, I can understand that.
The idea is also to help with, to have tooling for these files. So live preview is one thing, of course, but if you have an interactive way of designing these files and saving it, you also make it more approachable to non-Rust developers. So ideally, you could have a designer to do the UI and hand it over to a Rust programmer, and then they just put it into their code. That would be, of course, the ideal. We are definitely not there yet.
So with the editor that you're hoping to be working on, or you're working on that already right now, that tool you're talking about?
I am not started yet. I'm just poking around the code base all over the place and trying to get a feel for it, find the places I need to interact with, that kind of thing, and also do some smaller tasks here and there.
Okay, so with that tool, is that kind of the idea, is that you want it to be so easy to use that a designer can kind of start to implement the UIs and then just maybe export that language file and kind of hand it off to somebody to work on?
I mean, that's definitely an ideal we would like to achieve at some point, but it's definitely not there yet. So right now, you basically need some kind of experience to write program in our language to actually do that, which it's not a real programming language, so it's not that hard to get started with it. So it's more like CSS, HTML, that kind of thing than Rust itself.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So basically, okay, I see. Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I do have to ask, like, the company's name is still going to be 60FPS.
Yes.
But why change the name to Slint? Is it that you guys were planning to do more products, and so you need to have a different name so that you can do more products, or what's kind of the idea?
Whenever we showed up on Reddit or somewhere, we had people going, oh, why 60 FPS? My monitor has 120 hertz already. You're totally outdated, that kind of things. We also had people ask whether they need to have 2 licenses to use it on a 120 hertz monitor and stuff like that. And it's funny for the first time, but when you keep hearing it, you start to look for a better name. So we asked our community on GitHub about suggestions for the name, and Slint is basically what fell out of it. We always want to be a straightforward, lightweight native toolkit, and Slint is basically It's a combination of those letters.
So what does the word Slint mean? Because I don't quite understand.
So we used to have a sub-slogan like straightforward, lightweight, and native. So the S is for straightforward, LI for lightweight, N for native, and the T for toolkit. It's the origin story, basically, but we just use it as a name now.
I don't know. Maybe I need some more time, but I feel 60FPS is just such a better name. Slint is, I understand that, okay, 120 hertz about, but 60 FPS is kind of like, it's still the de facto. I mean, you and I are old people, I think. So we know 60 FPS is good. Slint, I mean, it just feels weird, I don't know. Are you happy with the new name?
I actually like it a lot. I prefer it. But I guess you will just get used to it after a while.
I think the name change thing is definitely something that's tricky, right? Because I remember, in particular, in the Ruby community, there's this thing called RuboCop, and there was quite a lot of people who wanted to change the name because the name cop, at the time, there was, a lot of shootings by police, supposedly. Each situation is different, right? But anyways, some people were offended by the name because of those things that were happening. And the main guy said, listen, I don't want to change the name because, people know this product by the name. It was a play on RoboCop, which is from the 80s, way before any of this stuff ever happened. I'm just a fan of that movie, I think he basically said. And he said, listen, if I do change it, and then you try to, do a gem install from Ruby for this thing, you won't be able to find it, and people won't be able to find it. And it's just such a hassle to make such a name change. Do you guys think it is a hassle or anything? Because everybody knows 60FPS, but people are just starting to realize that now it's called Slint.
Well, we're a pretty young project so far. So we thought the sooner we get this over with, the better, basically. And yes, it was a lot of work. It is a lot of hassle still.
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually kind of curious. So wait, but did we actually cover why there's a name change? That part is still not quite clear for me. Is it just that you guys wanted to... Yeah, why was it? It's
basically because all the feedback we got about, that's a terrible name, 120 hertz, 144 hertz, whatever.
Sorry. You mentioned that. I just feel like it's not a good reason, but okay, I understand that there could be a lot of trolls out there that are bugging you.
Well, if you hear it once, it's not a good reason, but if you hear it whenever you hit any social media, so basically half the discussion is about the name, and the rest is about the actual interesting stuff, then it gets boring fast. And at least we lost that part of the conversation so far with the name change.
But now you're going to hear from people, why did you change the name? 60FPS is much better. Now people are never going to find your project. You're going to hear this kind of stuff now?
Yes, we will, but we will get over it, I hope.
It's kind of like, you ever heard you heard the expression before, it's like you can't please everybody all the time?
Definitely. I mean, I started in the open source world in the mid-1990s, and I've got a lot of hubbub about projects renaming themselves, not renaming themselves. Why is this project still calling offensive term number, whatever? And all these discussions, it's basically endless. And in the end, a project needs a name. I think Slint is a pretty good name for a project like ours. So let's see how it will work out.
I'm almost wondering if you should capitalize all of it because it makes it more clear that it's an acronym, but maybe, I don't know.
Well, we use it as a name now. So it comes from acronym, but we don't really emphasize that too much.
That makes sense. Okay, so when was the name change? I remember we talked before on that's how we got to know each other, and that was quite some time ago, right? So the name change happened about how long ago?
About 2 weeks ago, something like that. Okay. So it was in February. It was a very busy February.
I'd say I just pulled that time frame out myself out of nowhere, so I'm happy I guessed correctly. I remember it's definitely new because we were prepared for this episode, and I just wanted to do some research, and then I was like, oh, Slint, okay, interesting. I wonder why Slint, but okay. So, but that doesn't change the product at all, right? It's just a name change. There's nothing else that was significantly changed also like around the same time.
Oh, we did a minor release. So we went to version 0.2. We took the opportunity to break a couple of smaller APIs that are probably not too user visible. But it was an opportunity to clean up a couple of things. I mean, if you have to change your code anyway to change the crate names, for example, we can also take the opportunity to do some more cleanups. But I ported a couple of projects that were already using 60FPS to Slint, and it was a pretty straightforward experience. So it involves a couple of steps to do, but we have documentation for that, and we do take backward compatibility pretty seriously. So we made sure not to break too much.
So you guys really embody the whole entire Rust philosophies, don't break stuff.
Oh, yes, we definitely do. I mean, all of us worked on UI toolkits before, so we have lots of experience with user feedback about breaking things. And we do take that very serious.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And actually, the fact that you guys are in the automotive industry is a very serious industry, right? So I had a discussion with Florian and Ada Core in my last podcast recording, and they're talking all about ferrocene, which is supposed to hit that kind of industry. And I think automotive is definitely in that industry. So I think having that backwards compatibility must be from a similar kind of industry, right? Where you have this idea that
Definitely.
like the right APIs that they can't change.
So in previous lives, we also did a lot of work for medical companies, with automotive companies, with avionics, flight recording stuff, and they all have product cycles that are basically several decades. We do take that topic very serious.
Okay, so that philosophy must have bled into the product then, and I think that's good, right? So, is there anybody actually using 60 FPS in production now, or do you guys not consider yourself production ready yet? I think you guys are production
Oh,
ready,
we do
right?
have a couple of customers already. So that's basically the reason why we started hiring people. So it's developing slowly, but we do have a couple of customers, and we hope to grow during the year and get some more developers on board to make even more progress.
Can we talk about what kind of industries you guys are serving?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to discuss that, sorry.
Okay, I'm kind of curious about what kinds of industries might be using this, but if you can't talk about it, it's so sad. But it is you guys have customers. Can you talk about how many people are using it, or how many customers, or that also is private information?
It's just a couple of teams that are working with it yet, so it's not too big yet.
Okay, is there anything out in production yet, or just kind of playing or getting something
So
ready?
far, it's not in production yet. It's just developing products for release in the next year or two. I don't know.
Mm. So when you guys are working on the product now, is a lot of it like developing, helping to kind of push the product too?
Oh, they do, yes. We get lots of valuable feedback from our customers, and it also helps prioritize issues. So we are really happy that we have them.
Okay, so how does the feedback work with them? Is it that they kind of, as they're developing, they kind of come back and say, this is not quite working, or this is broken, or this, we really want this feature. And then you guys kind of discuss and kind of prioritize that because these guys are actually kind of paying customers?
Of course, we prioritize issues from our customers. That's definitely a given. But there's also a lot of feedback like, we want to achieve the following thing. How would you go about that? So we've kind of developed interfaces with the customer or with our customers that way. And they bring new use cases that we haven't considered yet. And then we talk about how to implement them. We try to support them as well as we can.
Okay. So how do you guys actually setting up your priorities right now? Is it really based on the customers you have right now, or is it that you guys have your own roadmap or a little mix of the two, or how do you guys work right now?
We are very open source focused at the moment. So customer input is, of course, the primary source of priorities, but we also get lots of feedback from community members, and we also get PRs. So some of the features just happen naturally overnight without us doing anything, which is always a bit of a challenge when you want to plan bigger issues for a while. But that's how open source works. So, and I really like it that way. It's always interesting when you get into the office and see some new PR popping up and stuff.
Yeah, this is true. Okay. So supporting these three different types. So you guys support JavaScript, C++, and sorry, what was that? It's Rust, obviously, right? Is
Yes.
there plans to support more, or these are the three you guys are just planning to stick with?
Oh, we would like to support more, but on the other hand, it becomes a support issue at some point. So we cannot just add more and more languages all of the time. So we're probably going to stick with these three for a while. But if somebody wants to work on other language support, they are basically more than welcome to do so.
Okay, that makes sense. So what is it that I'm kind of curious, right? So you did mention to me before the show that people are really interested in your licensing model.
Yes.
You have three different types of licensing, right? So can we talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have a GPL license, of course. We have a commercial license. Currently, we have an ambassador program. So the commercial license is standard commercial pay-for licenses. GPL is basically a well understood open source license as well. We basically picked that model because, again, of our background, we've seen that work to build a UI toolkit for popular programming language before. So we hope that it helps us finance the development of a similar library or a similar system of crates for Rust as well. And right now, we also offer an ambassador program, which basically gets you a commercial license when you grant us the right to basically mention you in our marketing materials and similar things.
Yeah, the ambassador one's pretty interesting. So what's it between the ambassador and the commercial one? Is it just that if you can show off what you're working on, then That's kind of worth the license?
Yes, basically. So just get in touch with us if you are interested, and we're happy to discuss exact details with you. So it's basically the same license as a commercial one, but we do appreciate the opportunity to mention your product in our marketing materials. So to give some, so that we can provide our other interested people with more case stories about and success stories. That's basically the idea behind it.
Okay. So what kinds of, has anybody actually taken that ambassador license yet? Or is everybody kind of doing commercial and the free one?
I know a couple of projects that use the GPL license. I know that we had contact with a couple of people about the ambassador license, but I'm not really actively involved in that area, so I cannot really provide details there. And obviously, we do have some customers that use the commercial licensing as well. So it looks like it's becoming a healthy mix.
Okay. Seems pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, like 60 FPS or now Slint has been kind of known as, I don't know, there's that whole entire like, are we GUI yet? And I think Slint has probably always been referenced as like the most GUI-like one out there that I can think of. How does Slint compare to other GUI frameworks that are in Rust? I think there's also a couple others. eGUI, I think, is a big one. IMGUI, I think, is another one.
I'm not too deep in that the other libraries, so any comparison I would make would be rather incomplete. I just recommend just give everything a try and see for yourself what works best for your project. We all seem to have slightly different use cases in mind, so pick whatever works best for you.
So if people wanted to use Slint, like what kinds of use cases do you think Slint is best used for?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So we're currently investing a lot of effort into making Slint smaller and scale better to lower end platforms. So we put a lot of work into microcontroller support right now. We are currently working on getting our demos running on a Raspberry Pi Nano with just a couple of 100K of memory. So Slint is definitely something I would look at. And if you want some native looking desktop applications, we can also support that. So we're also pretty good at customizing designing custom UIs. So if that's any one of those is something you need, please feel free to stop by and chat.
So if I wanted to make, say, a very customized UI, can I actually do that using Slint out of the box? Or is it that I have to work with you or I have to do some big customizations to Slint itself in order to support that?
Well, basically, you can design your own widget elements if you want to, and design your own buttons and just use them just like normal ones.
So they're really composable. So I can say, like,
yes.
I want this color and this thing. Okay.
Yeah, basically, you define a component, and the component can be a button or an entire window or the entire UI of your application. It's components all the way down.
Like when I define a component, how customized can I get? I'm talking about like look and feel.
So basically, we have basic components for keyboard interaction, mouse interactions, that kind of thing. So you can use those and hook into that. You can draw passes or your images, whatever you want. So you can go pretty far with that. You can also animate different states and graphical effects going back and forward and all that stuff.
You mean some very fancy looking animations?
Yep, that's already supported, yes.
I watched your video that you sent to me before, the YouTube one, and I think a calendar invite. And I didn't see any fancy animations that I can think of. Oh, no, sorry. There was a sliding effect, right? Something like that.
Yeah, so if somebody writes a really fancy graphical demo, that would be also awesome to see and reference on our websites. We can do way more than is actually visible in the demo, and that's a bit annoying at the moment. So we should have a better demo.
Okay, so basically, if I wanted to slap a UI into something very, very low powered, then Slint would be the thing to use, is what you're saying. So that's interesting. The niche market you're going for.
Definitely is something we're very interested in, yes.
Okay. Where do you guys actually get your inspiration from when you're working on your libraries and trying to create your kind of stuff?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So for the library itself, I mean, we did similar libraries before for C++. So we kind of know the problem space quite well. We tend to meet up in a coffee shop somewhere here in the area and discuss ideas and suggestions by community members, customers, whatever. Then we try to find a good solution. I guess it's pretty normal in any project to work like that. So nothing special.
Yeah, but I don't know if you guys are kind of referencing the existing library that you guys are saying, okay, I like the way they do this one. We should try this or do this kind of stuff.
So generally, we try to close. We have tried to have our language stay close to CSS style, and if there's something that's simply because a lot of people are familiar with that. So that's definitely a source of inspiration for many of the APIs and stuff we expose.
Okay, that makes sense too. I think I had that feeling when I was looking at the demo. So, I mean, do you guys have like any web background? Because you're working in automotive, right? That's why I'm kind of interested why you guys are looking at it in that way. Is that you guys are thinking that a lot of web developers are getting into Rust and therefore they may be more familiar with that kind of CSS style?
Well, CSS is basically pretty universal by now. It's also well understood by lots of developers, lots of UI savvy people. So I think it makes sense to take inspiration from there.
Yeah, where HTML is the structure and then CSS is just the way to make it more pretty, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Have you guys ever thought about doing the style of like, we talked about this, I think before the show, but not during the show, where like, Swift UI, Dart with Flutter, this kind of like declarative UI, all reusing kind of the language's native components to design the UI instead?
We are looking into that to use native components. Right now, we don't have that. We can bind to Qt and use that as a backend, basically. Then we get native looking components, at least, like that's what Qt does. So we can integrate pretty well into the different operating systems right now. But long term, we would like to have own styles for the different operating systems we support.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. I mean, I really think that this is a pretty awesome library. Let me just double check if I'm missing anything else.
Yeah, what I like about it is that we actually make a lot of progress because we do have a company backing it. We do have full-time people working on it. So I'm fascinated by the progress we are making over there and trying to document that with weekly updates on our website so that people can follow along and see what's happening.
Is everything being developed in the open on GitHub? Is that right?
Everything is on GitHub, yes.
Now, have you guys ever gotten any features and stuff from the community so far, or is it just you guys kind of inputting everything yourself?
No, it's developing. So we did recently have some guy contributed support for different mouse pointers and integrated those into the UI. It was a young student. He's working as an intern for us right now. So we took the opportunity to get him involved deeper.
So you mean that we can now have Mickey Mouse hands? You know, that little hand you have when you mouse over a button?
I think that works now, yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. How about screen readers, though?
We don't have that yet. We are looking into that. Topic of accessibility is a huge one. So screen reader is one end. Right now, I'm trying to get better keyboard support in to help people that have problems with motoric skills. We already support scaling and different styles. So visually impaired people, we can adapt to visually impaired people to some level, but we are definitely not in a position to support screen readers right now. There's actually a pretty interesting crate about that. I think it's called SSKit, which recently popped up on our radar that enables Rust UI applications to work with the native accessibility backends. And we definitely would like to investigate how that could work with our stuff further.
Has anybody actually approached you guys saying, hey, we would love to use this, but we're missing this accessibility part? I mean, there must be some people because that is a really pretty big market, surprisingly.
Yeah, it is, definitely. So we get lots of feedback about that. We are very well aware of the topic, but we are not where we want to be in that area yet.
Yeah, I always find it so surprising because, like, to me, it just, as somebody who uses computer all the time, like, it's so visual that I forget that, yeah, you can also describe it with words.
Yes.
Or whatever else. So that's going to be super interesting. And just the other day, like, I woke up this morning and I saw a tweet, and this guy was saying, as an engineer who is a software engineer who is actually blind, I want to actually help work out on a project where and actually add in screen reading support because of my state or disability, whatever you want to call it. So I actually find it super interesting to actually, I'm kind of curious how it actually works because it's so hard for me to understand as somebody who doesn't have that kind of situation.
I think accessibility is a very interesting topic, but it's a wide range of topics, actually. So there are lots of different people with different needs to help them interact with a computer. It's not just, I have a screen reader, I'm accessible. I mean, a blind person can work with it, but if you cannot, let's say, use a mouse or point precisely on something, it might still be challenging to use anyway. So it's a really big topic. We are aware of it and we try to address it. We are definitely not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also kind of curious if you guys also can support like that idea of like tabbing to different buttons and different inputs, etc., right? Because that's also a huge feature too, right?
That's what I'm working on right now.
Oh, okay. It's good to hear that you guys are using that. Because I mean, I know like these big companies like DHL and all that kind of stuff, they spend like a crap ton of money on these really, console-based systems. And but the other thing is like if you master the key bindings, the hotkeys, then you can be a pro. And so whenever they have to change a system, everybody flips because it's like, no, I'm master of these hotkeys. Like, how about hotkeys, things like that?
Yep, I know that. So we had that a lot in different consulting jobs I did before when people basically knew that they had to hit the tab key five times to go from this input field to that input field. And then you just removed a button or something and it was only 4 and they went crazy about that. But anyway, so I kind of got interested in the topic because we have a little program called Cargo UI, which is a graphical UI for cargo, which all kind of different features like update your crates and stuff like that. And I would really like to be able to use that with a keyboard. So that's my motivation to get started with that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like using a mouse much more. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting old. Like, I don't like using Visual Code Studio. I like using IntelliJ and just clicking play button.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Even though there's a hotkey, I'm sure, I just like clicking play button. So you and I maybe are old fogies like that.
I'm way more keyboard focused than you are, apparently. So I really like being able to do everything with a keyboard.
Yeah, but you have to remember all that stuff. I mean, I can't remember all these things.
Yeah, that's why I also appreciate the UI and being able to see something presented in a nice UI, but I want to click on it. I want to use a keyboard to interact with it at some point, at least when it's something I do repeatedly. So for one-off tasks, I don't bother, but if it's something like I do like a couple of times a day, I want to be able to do that by keyboard.
So you'll never stop using Control-C, Control-V, right?
Oh, I'd use that. Of course, it's keyboard controls.
I was just say, you never would use a mouse to do that, will you?
While selecting text with a mouse, it feels a bit painful, yes.
Yeah.
But that's just a matter of preferences. I don't think I'm more productive than anybody else with my way of doing things. It's just that I'm used to it.
Yeah, I understand. So what else is actually on the roadmap coming up for Slint?
So right now we are pretty much looking into slimming it down for getting it basically running nicely on a microcontroller. I'm looking right now into the focus handling, for example, doing some other things on the side. And for the year, I definitely want to get started with some more tooling around it. Improve the language server we have, add some features there, add a couple of debugging abilities there, like display where you click on something when you interact with a live preview, things like that. Maybe improve our unit testing framework a bit.
Yeah. How is your unit testing and everything? How do you guys actually do all that? You don't actually spin it up and try to run everything, right? You're only doing, not unit testing, but integration testing. Are you doing anything like that?
Oh, we have lots and lots of tests. So we run basically so the whole Slint language has pretty extensive test coverage. It's basically running in a test environment with some fake graphic backends so that we can actually inspect what's happening in there. So we have lots of tests and they all run in all the different languages all the time.
So you can actually spin up something and kind of run through something like with clicking and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, basically we have unit tests like if I click in that place and this button has to become active, or then if I do something else, I click there, then that button becomes active. If I click on this line it did, enter this keystrokes, and I expect this text to be there. And we can run that test from Rust or backends. We can run it from C++. We can run it from Node. So basically all the languages we support are covered by that.
How big is your test suite? Like, I'm curious how long it takes to run everything.
It's actually takes surprisingly little time because the whole thing is mocked. So we can also do things like pretend to wait for 10 seconds or something like that so that we can test animations. Like see a value that's the start of the animation, then step through the animation, see that the value changes as expected, and then that the animation stops at a certain time. So the whole thing is mocked, so it's actually pretty decent for performance-wise. I guess maybe 10 minutes for the whole thing. That's probably too long.
10 minutes is still a long time for Rust tests, I think.
Yeah, but it's also building all the C++ stuff. It's doing the Node stuff, so that takes a while. It's probably not even 10 minutes, but it's about that ballpark, I guess. And of course, we have that in CI, so whenever we commit or do a pull request, all the entire battery of tests is run on the change.
You're using probably the GitHub Actions, right?
Yes, we do. Lots of them.
You see, burning up all the GitHub stuff, right? All the GitHub credits.
Yes, definitely. It's really amazing what kind of infrastructure you can get for very little money nowadays. So when I started out, we had to basically set up our own Subversion servers everywhere and no CI and nothing. And nowadays, basically the whole infrastructure is just there, and even from different providers. So you can go to GitHub or GitLab or SourceHut, whatever. It's really amazing. We've come a long way since I started with this whole open source stuff.
Yeah, so you used to come from C++ just before you joined this company, right?
Yes, I started C++ development in the mid-1990s. I started with an open source project that was back then started by some guy called Graydon Hoa. So that's the first time I ever ran in with that guy. So when I later discovered that that guy had written a language called Rust, I was really interested.
I'm just kind of curious because you hit C++ for a while, then you switched over to Rust. Like, do you miss C++? Do you some things that you wish you had, or are you happier now that you've moved on to Rust?
So overall, I'm really happy with Rust. I really appreciate the tooling. It's just a lot with build systems in C++ before on all the different ones and trying to make them interoperate and all that stuff. And I'm so happy with Cargo. And all the linting stuff that we have with Clippy, the compiler error messages, they are so wonderful.
Yeah, Clippy is super awesome. I almost kind of wonder sometimes why Clippy isn't just built into the Cargo, but a must-have whenever you get your Rust installed. So what was I going to say? I'm kind of curious, like, what's actually underneath the hood of what's actually powering most of Slint? Like, what kind of graphics libraries are you running?
So we use a lot of well-known crates in the ecosystem. And so we use Winit for the window handling or Qt, GL libraries, basically what everybody else uses too, which is actually a real benefit for us because so much of the infrastructure work is shared between the different UI environments. It's really amazing how we can help each other out, basically. So we fix something and the Winits guys fix something and all that comes together so nicely. It's really, really cool.
Oh, so you guys are also like kind of coming into other places saying, hey, this is kind of broken, or hey, this needs some assistance, etc. And then you kind of work with them to get it all fixed?
Oh, definitely. So we have lots of patches in C++, CMake integration like Crate. We occasionally do patches for other libraries like, I don't know, Winit. We talk to those guys a lot. Well, in the end, we are trying to make our product great and make everybody else's product a bit better along the way if we can. So it's real fun to work there, work on all these different libraries and in such an open environment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. Like, I think we really covered most of what I'm looking for to hear about Slint. Is there something else that you wanted to let people know about Slint? I mean, maybe even just a shout out about people should come use it or anything like that?
So if you want to use it, if you're interested, please stop by on our GitHub page. We have a MetaMost chat available, so you can reach us anytime. We try to have a friendly little community just like the rest of Rust. Yeah, feel free to give it a try. Tell us what you think about it. Provide feedback, provide patches, ideally, of course. Whatever works for you.
So is it kind of like, don't complain unless you're going to come up with a fix kind of thing?
Oh, sure, definitely complain too.
So just bring feedback, or even better is bring a solution, right? Bring something.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
we are very strong open source people. So all three of us have done open source basically all our professional life. So we really enjoy this community aspect a lot and try to treat everybody fairly and work with people and fix issues in the right places and not just work around them so that it works for us and stuff like that. So we really try to bring the community forward.
And it seems like if you bring a feature to Slint, you may actually get a job offer. It seems like that's what happened to the intern, right?
Yes, I am not sure how that will scale, but I would be happy if we could do that, of course.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate you can come on and talk about Slint, and I think it's very exciting. And yeah, someday maybe I might check it out for a project. Hopefully, if I get a chance to work with Rust and break a GUI with it. Otherwise, I want to keep seeing what's going on. I think there's going to be a lot of big things going on for 60FPS as a company, and both also as Slint the product.
Oh, I hope so. So I'm really curious how this whole thing will work out and how the Rust UI story will evolve, because that's, in my opinion, one of the critical pieces that's not great yet.
Yeah.
And I would really be happy to contribute to the solution here, at least to one solution.
I'm happy that you guys are actually doing something as opposed to waiting for somebody else to do it. That's also huge. And you're also making a company out of it, which is good and not easy to do. But for sure, as you guys found out, there is a market for it. And I think you guys are definitely one of the top contenders top contenders in terms of solutions for that market.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be able to join 60FPS and work for that. And I really enjoy my work a lot. So I also appreciate the opportunity to be on podcasts and talk about Slint. It's always such a pleasure to do that. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.